Well, most of us grew up knowing we should eat the 4 food groups, especially the vegetables. But figuring out how to eat healthy feels increasingly more complex. So-called wellness experts online are telling us to take collagen, creatine, even colostrum. Plus, walk down the aisles of the grocery stores and you'll see the push for protein everywhere. But could protein be soon pushed aside for a new craze? You just heard about Fibermaxxing. Have you started it yet? See what I mean? It's a bit confusing. What are we actually supposed to eat these days? Meanwhile, the United States has flipped its food pyramid. Americans are now encouraged to eat more protein and avoid highly processed foods. So, today on Blue Sky, we help answer all your nutrition-related questions. I'm Leisha Grabinski, and we have a registered dietitian standing by to help us figure out what trends to stick with and what to ditch. You can call with some of your questions at 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Brooke Bullock is a registered dietitian here in Saskatoon. She is CEO of Food to Fit Nutrition, and she's with me here in our Saskatoon studio. Brooke, welcome back to Blue Sky.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
I want to hear all about Fibermaxxing, but I want to start with the changes to the U.S. food guide. So maybe just give us your initial reaction, your initial take on the changes that many people are trying to make sense of. What do you see when you look at the changes?
You know, the new guidelines really have the same core principles as the version released in 2020. So there's not a whole lot that has actually changed. The emphasis is still on fruit, vegetables, protein, and they do include plant proteins, dairy, whole grains, while limiting added sugar and saturated fat. However, the new guidelines really, there's a contradiction between the visual and written guidelines. So the visual just don't really seem to match what is written. And the worry, I think, that some of the dietitians who I follow and know in the United States is that it's going to be, people aren't going to read the written guidelines. They'll just look at the upside-down pyramid.
And maybe describe the upside-down pyramid. What does it include?
So at the top, they have red meat, whole milk, and cheese alongside fruit and vegetables. And there is not the inclusion of those plant proteins at the very top, like legumes, like pulses, beans, peas, lentils, but also soybeans, nuts, and seeds. And these are all linked with health outcomes, positive health outcomes, and with meat prices continuing to rise in 2026, this is here in Canada, I imagine it'll be similar in the States. These can be, more financially accessible. So red meat, whole milk, and cheese, all high in saturated fat. And the guidelines continue to recommend that saturated fat be limited, which again hasn't changed yet. The food, the new guide, visual guide, has these at the top. So it does, I think, have potential to suggest to people to eat these the most alongside fruit and vegetables. And then, saturated fat is a public health concern, is not a public health concern. I mean, in terms of the fact that we are not getting enough. We get an abundance of saturated fat in the diet already. And so the public health concern there is just that we really want to watch the intake and make more room for omega-3s, which is a public health concern. Like, most North Americans don't get enough omega-3s. So yeah, there's a lot of confusion there.
Okay, well, some of the confusion that I have been curious about is where butter and beef tallow fit into this, because I feel like Robert F. Kennedy has talked about the health benefits of those two things, and I think that fits into the pyramid that you're talking about of red meat, saturated fat. So can you just explain, I guess, what he's saying, but then what your dietitian take on it would be?
So, butter and beef tallow are highly saturated fat and are high in saturated fat, and they can certainly be used as part of an overall well-balanced, healthful diet. And we do on the pyramid see that vegetable oil, or like the jar of oil in the visual pyramid. But again, it's sort of by pushing this, people's intake will go up drastically or has potential to. So again, like what's on the visual pyramid and what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speaks about doesn't really align with what's actually in the guidelines, which again have not actually changed. So there's like, it's so confusing and people have a hard time understanding like what is actually going on here, like, and what is the messaging and why are things not aligning?
So if people are paying attention and they're noticing that things aren't aligning, what do they do at the grocery store when they're trying to choose between butter and margarine? Like maybe that's a really practical way of talking about this. Like if you're just trying to make a healthy choice, you're hearing the noise from the US, you're trying to figure out what's best for your family. Do you choose butter or margarine?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, ultimately, one of the things I try to remind my clients is that there is no single food on its own that is going to cure you or harm you. So we need to take things into a greater context. What is the pattern of eating? What is the food relationship? So many things. So yes, I think at the end of the day, it's sometimes a personal choice. Can we make more room? And it would be sort of, this is where a dietitian would assess how much, like, what is the saturated fat? I mean, we know that butter isn't all that spreadable, so a lot of people do prefer margarine, although, it just really depends on what they use. I don't think we live in a world where people are buttering their meat sandwiches anymore. Bless my mom, but like goodness, it was just not my favorite thing. So, but yeah, so it all depends on like how you use it and how much of it. But I think one of the concerns is that saturated fat can increase very quickly. Like we don't need a lot to make the saturated fat rise significantly. So when they suggest that saturated fat intake should remain below 10% of our total caloric intake, I mean, that's a lot of math to figure out. Like people aren't doing this in the store. So this is where, and I think we need to keep in mind that like these general government guidelines, like Canada has our own and very plant forward and they've got limitations too. It's not super culturally inclusive and whatnot. But the guidelines are kind of there as like general population health guidelines for generally healthy people. Mm-hmm. So we have to remember that not everyone, takes the guidelines and just like follows them to a T. And most people who have issues, whether it's mental health related, eating disorders, or chronic conditions, will need a personalized nutrition plan or some support. So, it's not, here's the food guide and on your way. But it can start as a basis. And I think, again, just what this MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, and some of the things that RFK Jr. discusses doesn't really align with what's on paper in the guidelines as well as what the previous guidelines look like.
And why would you say it's important to unpack what's going on in the U.S. when we are Canadians? We have our own food guidelines, but we're obviously influenced by a lot of what the U.S. does. Like maybe make the connection there as to why we should be paying attention and also why it's important to take a step back and kind of unpack what's going on in the U.S. before adopting it for ourselves.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I've had this question. People are asking, like, why do you care so much about what's going on in the United States? But there is so much overlap, and not only just in terms of consumers. Sometimes people don't understand that there is a difference between, say, the regulations from United States and Canadian regulations. So, for example, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is different from the U.S. And some people won't even understand that there's a difference between food guides as well. So, and because we're such close countries and there is so much overlap, a lot of the messaging just kind of goes back and forth. So, yeah, and I think we all know, I mean, we're all seeing what's happening politically. So I think we all know that there is a lot of influence back and forth. And yeah, we just want to clarify things. A lot of my clients will have questions and do have questions.
Yeah, and we've got some listeners with questions. I am speaking with Brooke Bullock, who's a registered dietitian in Saskatoon. She is CEO of Food to Fit Nutrition. She's here to offer some general guidance, not to give individualized health plans here on the radio, but people do have questions. And Brooke is offering some of her the information that she has at her fingertips. So let's go to a caller. We've got Stefan in Saskatoon who's on the line right now. Stefan, welcome to Blue Sky.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. So what's your question that you'd like to pose to Brooke?
Oh, God, there's so many, but the one that I called about was in regards to cleanses, box cleanses, lemon cleanses, and things like that, and what her suggestions are with those and what their efficacy actually is.
Great question, Stefan. Thank you. Brooke, cleanses. What's your take on that?
Mm-hmm. I have, it's been a while, but I have done a deep dive into cleanses previously. Ultimately, our body does a really great job of cleansing. It doesn't need help. And the best help that we can give it is probably reducing the amount of alcohol we take in. So our liver cleanses, our kidneys cleanse. We cleanse when we have a bowel movement. We cleanse when we sweat. So there's no good evidence to show that cleanses are effective at eliminating toxins. And if people, oftentimes I find that they're actually touted more for weight loss. And if people are losing weight, it's usually such a short period of time that ultimately it's water weight. So there's just not a lot of great research behind it.
Does that answer it for you, Stefan?
So one question. Well, a little bit. I would contradict some of that, but one question I do have. I went on years ago, and it's been a long time, and I will say that it was probably the healthiest I've been in my life, and that was in regards to doing more of an Ayurvedic diet, and the cleanses that came along with that. So one of the cleanses was once a week. It was doing a grapefruit cleanse with some olive oil and garlic, and it gave me energy. It gave me focus. I was actually quite surprised at the actual effect long term, because we did that cleanse. We had to do it for, I think it was almost 8 weeks, and I did it with my partner at the time, and it was an absolutely for us, it was mind-blowing, right? We really felt the effects. We could really see the results in our bodies. But the one thing that I was always afraid of was I doing damage? Was I acidifying my body or things like that?
Yeah, Brooke, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the first and foremost, your last question, no, I think over an 8-week period, most people would be okay. And again, we just don't have enough information to know. And certainly it might be a different story if someone had kidney issues or a failing liver. However, in the general healthy adult, I don't think there would be any damage per se. And I think also to your point about how amazing you felt, and this, although we don't have the research, it certainly doesn't discredit anyone's individual experience. However, we can't take an individual person's experience and say, "See, it works," from a health professional's perspective. So I always say, the individual knows their body best, and you have a lived experience. So anytime I'm working with someone, that comes forward, and that's really important. What did we learn from that? Although there's also this sustainability piece, and I think sometimes that's the whole point, is cleanses aren't meant to be forever and long-term, because then you would run into nutrient deficiency or maybe acid-base balance issues. And so absolutely, I think you obviously hit something for you as an individual. That's cool. Although we don't have the research for it, we also just can't say that everyone should be doing the same, because we also don't have enough research, and we know that everyone's unique in their health and how their body functions.
Stefan?
But yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, Stefan, I really appreciate you calling. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, guys.
Have a good day, Stefan. You can call us too with any questions or things that you're curious about. You might be seeing some things online or on television, and you're like, I don't know what this is about. Well, Brooke Bullock, our registered dietitian, can help give some guidance. So our number, not just Brooke's number, our number is 1-800-716-2221. That's where you can call us. Or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. We got an email from Christy who writes, I know as someone who runs and lifts weights that protein is important for me, but I'm trying to figure out if I need to have it more on the days that I work out or if I just need to consistently keep my protein high? It's a great question, Christy. Brooke, how would you answer that?
That is a great question. One of the things that's important is that, generally speaking, most people are not protein deficient. And so, just as an aside, too, with RFK Jr. saying that, they're waging war, or I don't know who he was suggesting there's a war on protein. There is no war on protein. Nobody really knows where that came from. We get an abundance of protein. Generally speaking, I do agree that the original guidelines, the RDA, is set too low, especially for active folks. So 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is probably not enough, and it might not be enough for aging adults too. So, it would range, and it depends on the type of activity and how much. I would say probably as a starting point, aiming to kind of get that recovery protein along with carbohydrates. Again, we need carbohydrates to replenish the glycogen stores in the muscle so that protein can go fully to do its job in repair and building. If we don't have any carbs, some of that protein has to get converted into glucose. So so then you're not using the max amount of protein. But generally speaking, I would say most people can aim for around 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which does, coincide with research as well as what's within the new American food guidelines.
And would it matter which day you're meeting those needs? So if you're,
great question.
If you're lifting weights on a Tuesday, do you really got to make sure that your protein intake is high enough that day, or does it matter if you eat it on Wednesday?
I would say for the most part, it's your 24-hour intake that is going to matter, especially after a workout. So, but if a person is working out pretty consistently, every other day even, I would say just aim for some consistency. You might need a little bit more on workout days, especially as a recovery. But for the most part, aiming for a consistent 24-hour protein intake. And there's evidence to show that protein spread throughout the day, so over 3 meals and a couple of snacks, is ideal, and it also helps to boost your overall protein intake.
And do you have anything to say about kids and protein? Because if adults are getting the messaging about protein and you're packing your kids' lunches, there's probably a different... Your 6-year-old's needs are different than your 16-year-old's needs. And is there an age where you would want to be avoiding protein shakes, as an example? Or, once you're a teenager, is that stuff okay? Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that younger demographic and what we need to think about.
Okay, so first things first, one of the things I remind families when I'm working with them is if your child who's 12 and under is only consuming carbohydrates and all they eat is noodles, bread, crackers, granola bars, they will meet their protein needs. Yes.
I breathe a sigh of relief.
Yes. And I mean, we kind of forget that complex carbohydrates like pasta is very high in protein. I mean, especially if it contains gluten. It's a little bit harder if it is a gluten-free diet. But we do forget that grains do contain protein. Oatmeal, whole grain bread, like a slice of bread, a peanut butter sandwich, there is no meat and the only protein is a little bit of peanut butter. That'll be 10 to 12 grams of protein depending on how much peanut butter you put on it. So we kind of forget that. Right. Now, keep in mind, as we age, yes, we want to eat a variety of foods. Proteins are vast. We can get them from plants. We can get them from animals. And
teenagers, though, do they need...
Oh, when it comes to protein supplements.
I've been wondering about, kids who are growing up and they're seeing the same messages that I am, and are they reaching more for protein shakes, and should they be?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things when it comes to sports supplements is most of the research is done in adults, so 18 or 19 and up. So we just don't have the data. And so this is where we would take things with caution. Now, a little bit of protein powder in a shake here and there is not going to harm them. However, I think it's sort of the perspective or the impression that we're giving children. And ultimately, at the base of the pyramid, even really active children, athletes, everybody, adult or child, the base of the pyramid is getting enough to eat. So they will thrive, and they're just with their growth and their skill, all they need is enough to eat. So don't restrict them, give them a variety, just make sure that they feel like their tummies are full. And of course, we see a lot of different scenarios. Some kids are on medications that suppress their appetite. That can make it nuanced and very difficult.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if kids are getting enough to eat in a variety of foods, they'll do fine. So no, protein and powders and supplements, that's at the very top and the very tip of the ice pyramid.
Yep.
So after getting enough to eat, then we'd focus on variety, maybe some balance, maybe we'd be picking out micronutrients, but no, protein powders would be the very last thing that we would look at.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Leisha Grabinski. You are listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1. Give us a call today with your nutrition-related questions, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Next to me is Brooke Bullock, a registered dietitian. Brooke, I want to just talk a bit more about the U.S. food guide, because the other aspect that's getting a lot of attention that people are trying to better understand is they've taken a stronger stance on highly processed foods, and that's different than the language we had before with ultra-processed foods. So maybe just take us through that aspect of the guidelines and help us make sense of that.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to make sense of it because even though we use the term processed food, highly processed food, ultra-processed food, when you look at research and definitions, there's actually not a universal definition for an ultra-processed food. And I think it is, in some ways, ultra-processed foods has now been a synonym for the quote-unquote junk food, bad food. And that's not entirely accurate. As a general, I think we have to remember that processing occurs on a spectrum. So we don't take wheat out of the field and eat it because it's not palatable. So in order to make it palatable, we do grind it and we turn it into flour, and we might, in terms of public health, support, we would add back some iron and folate and things like that, folic acid, and make a bread. So bread would be considered a processed food, but a lot of food that we eat is technically processed. Now, ultra-processed foods is where we're getting into higher levels of saturated fat, sodium, and sugar. So I would say that, for example, I shared a low-capacity meal that I was eating the other day. There was absolutely nothing original about this meal.
When you say low capacity, it just means like something you can throw together quickly, that grabbing a few items from the grocery store.
If my mental health isn't great, if my anxiety is really high, if my appetite is gone and I just don't want to eat, or if I'm struggling to put a meal together, or maybe it's just a really busy sports day and I'm running my child around, I call that low capacity, not lazy.
Yeah, okay.
I don't believe in the word lazy.
Yeah.
So, but it was higher in sodium. It was a baked Caesar salad. It was like a processed stuffed chicken breast, breaded chicken breast that you bake in the oven, and it was French fries that I put in the air fryer. So yeah, I eat those things too. And I think, again, it all comes down to your pattern, the frequency, what's accessible to you. And I do want to kind of hit home that this pressure around eat real food, like what does that mean? And it's interesting because they often have non-scientists, and by they I mean Maha, RFK Jr., speak to, and there's a RFK Jr. was reading some ingredients and he can't pronounce them. And that's a classic. If you can't pronounce it, you shouldn't be eating it. It's like, well, it's actually just chemistry. So if you have someone with a science background, it's actually, we know exactly what it is. Riboflavin is B2. Right. It's just a vitamin. And most people who are taking their, energy drinks or supplement waters or protein bars will have all kinds of ingredients in them. It doesn't make it not real food, but food is science. There are food scientists. That's their job. And humans are chemistry. the air we breathe is chemistry. The water we drink is chemistry. So there is a little bit of chemophobia or chemophobia, a fear of chemicals. And we have to understand chemistry. It's not scary. It is life. And so there's a lot to it.
So how do you work with people who are trying to make good choices? They're staring at the cereal box aisle and they're like, I don't want to serve my kid processed foods, but how do I choose? So there must be some guidelines that you're following, even when you're choosing those you're trying to throw together a low capacity meal. Like, what would you be looking for on a label? where do you begin?
I honestly begin with balance. And we all, anyone who has children or anyone who's a teen or adult who has a really selective palate, you can't just force kids to eat what you want them to eat, and we can't just force ourselves to eat the things that we feel like we should eat. And for example, we work with a lot of folks with neurodivergence, and sometimes it can come along with really unique preferences for certain textures or having taste aversions and so on and so forth. So again, tons of nuance to this. Generally speaking, as a guideline, I would say instead of starting with the label, start with the balance. So and you have to, start with what your kids are used to. Like if they're not used to having plain shredded wheat or if they're not used to having oatmeal, you can offer it and they might not take it. So we need a balance at that meal. So if people get anything out of today, I would say the most useful would be, does your meal contain a grain or starch, a fruit or vegetable? And I say fruit or vegetable because like the other day, there was no cold veggies I wanted, but I was in a rush. So I had a navel orange and that's okay. So fruit or vegetable and some sort of protein. So that's balancing the plate. And even if it doesn't look ideal, maybe they're still hitting the Fruit Loops. Maybe you haven't been able to, move forward. The protein could be nuts. It could be high protein milk. These are all going to add a lot of nutrients. And then the fruit or vegetable on the side. After that, when it comes to kids, we can't force them to eat that either. All we can do is offer. But for ourselves, say an adult, you're making a decision for yourself. Yeah, trying to choose the lower sugar options. I like cereal. We'll just stick with cereal because that's the topic. But I like cereal. I'm a breakfast cereal eater. I have been since I was a child. I like oatmeal. I like other things too. But I buy plain. And then I add the sugar at home because you're likely to add a little less. And then you add the protein. I go and add extra nuts and some sort of fruit or berries on top. And then you suddenly have a balanced meal. So maybe less to do with the label, more to do with what can you add to the meal.
Speaking of adding to the meal, people are trying to save money by buying frozen berries, frozen vegetables, especially in our winter climate, right?
Yes.
So are they as healthy as fresh?
This is a great question, and I had this question from a client the other day, and yes, frozen are absolutely acceptable and sometimes even better because you get the best part of the crop. Sometimes when we buy fresh berries, there's a couple that are spoiled, and then that spoils the rest of them sooner. And frozen berries are picked at ripeness, and the freezing process doesn't decline or negatively affect the vitamin status. So a lot of the frozen fruits and vegetables that you see also don't have any added sugar or salt, whereas canned do. So frozen often go on sale, yes, especially in the vegetable aisle. And I must say, I feel like frozen peas today taste way better than when I was a kid. They're quite sweet.
They are good.
Yes.
I'm speaking today with Brooke Bullock. She's a registered dietitian in Saskatoon, CEO of Food to Fit Nutrition. I'm Alicia Grabinski. This is Blue Sky. We are taking your questions about nutrition. So give us a call today, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. No surprise, Brooke, we're getting a lot of questions, so I'll go through a couple of emails here. Christy writes, I am in perimenopause and take progesterone. Do I need to avoid soy or any other food for hormonal reasons? Now, I know people always have more to their story that a dietitian would unpack more fully in a one-on-one consultation. But just reading that, does this person need to avoid soy or any other food for hormonal reasons?
So, disclaimer, this would be a better discussion with your doctor or gynecologist. I know a little bit, and I think probably between this person and their doctor or gynecologist, they have a plan around taking progesterone. And I'm assuming there's some estrogen in the mix, or at least my understanding is that there likely should be. So good question. And if the risk for breast cancer is low, then, and whatever, the gynecologist and the person will be assessing the risk for taking some hormone therapy for perimenopausal symptoms. And if the risk is low, no, you don't have to avoid soy. And in fact, soy-based foods have been shown to be beneficial when it comes to heart health as well as cancer reduction. So most people aren't consuming excessive amounts of soy from food and diet. You might double check in terms of protein powders or protein bars, but for the most part, tofu, edamame beans, soy milk, these are all excellent things that may help with some perimenopausal symptoms. If not, at least helping with the rising cholesterol we typically see, the bone strength and density that we typically see decline, and risk for heart attack and stroke with menopause.
Okay. Thanks, Christy, for sending that. We also have an email from Kathy who writes, "We have started eating a small serving, about 2 tablespoons of kimchi with our lunch. I read an article that it is beneficial for your gut biome. Does your guest agree with that? And are we eating about the right amount?"
Great question.
Great question. Yes.
So I'm a GI dietitian, so I love talking about all things gut health and fiber and fermented foods. When it comes to fermented foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, it's important that it has to be like a naturally fermented. So it can't be like the jarred sauerkraut that's vinegared. Right. But yeah, kimchi's great. And I also enjoy kimchi at times. And we also have yogurt and kefir that, or kefir, however you pronounce it, that's available. So when it comes to fermented foods, there's definitely benefits to the host, and we're not totally sure from the science if the microbes in fermented foods survive the acidity of the stomach and reach the large intestine and have benefits. We think that there are. However, a lot of fermented foods enhance the nutrients, and they just seem to have benefits to the host outside of their fermentation. So we think that there could be some benefit to the gut, and aside from that, there's a lot of other benefits. So people are often consuming more vegetables. It's often easier to digest, and again, it's going to depend on the individual, but I would say couple tablespoons with your lunch. That's a great start. It's
Sounds
wonderful.
Yummy.
It does sound delicious. Good. Yes.
Okay. Here's another follow-up question. If you heat the kimchi or sauerkraut, is it still as effective?
Great question. I'm not sure if I know exactly how to answer that. I don't think it would affect. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not sure if the microbes would be killed by the heat processing, but nonetheless, it wouldn't ruin any of the nutritional value. But that I actually don't know how to answer.
Okay, well, that's fair. That's fair. Yes. Okay, so we got an email from Warren who writes, "Is yogurt a fairly healthy food as far as gut health goes? I presently make my own, and I don't know how to pronounce it either, kefir. Is it kefir? I think so, yeah. Kefir, and don't mind the bitterness as other people do." So I guess, yeah, it's just reiterating kind of what you just said, that yogurt, in Warren's mind, a healthy food as far as gut health goes. And you would agree with that, yogurt and kefir.
Yes, absolutely. And we know that yogurt, when it's made from cow's milk, is going to be rich in riboflavin, potassium, calcium, and protein. So, and then potentially the fermented benefits. For people also who have some lactose intolerance, when cow's milk is fermented, sometimes it's easier to digest. So there can be benefits there.
And in choosing yogurts, full fat, 2%, are all yogurts created equal?
Great question. So the fat content, and this is where we get into the new American guidelines, they talk about whole milk. And so, yes, the higher fat, so 3% milk, or if you're getting into like the 9% yogurts, that's the percentage of fat, you get higher intakes of saturated fat. So generally speaking, like the Canadian guidelines would recommend low fat, which is 2% or less. So it doesn't have to be fat-free, and I like a little bit of fat in my yogurt. But for the most part, if it's something you consume a lot of, I would recommend 2% or less in terms of the fat content. But full disclosure, I bought the 9% yogurt and I mix it with my cottage cheese and granola. It's delicious.
Sounds good. Okay, we have another caller on the line. I'll remind people that you can call us too. We've got Brooke Bullock with us. She's a registered dietitian and CEO of Food to Fit Nutrition. So that number to call is 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. I'm actually going to go to another email here. So Robbie emails. This is a question about protein and ADHD kids. So Robbie writes, I'm looking for high protein ideas as I understand it is especially important for ADHD kids to have lots of protein. I shoot for 50 grams for a 50 kilogram child as part of a varied healthy diet. Any suggestions for protein besides nuts, whole wheat food, and meat?
Great question. When it comes to protein sources, and again, I assume that this is spread throughout the day. And again, for kiddos with ADHD, it depends if they're on medication or not. Sometimes there are windows where we need to maximize their intake because the medication can suppress their appetite. So, so other protein sources, you're absolutely right, like nuts and nut butters. But also if you're looking at dairy, so cheese, yogurt, milk, but this could include soy-based items like soy milk, which isn't often a fan favorite amongst kids, but some kiddos do eat tofu. Certainly you could do like a homemade smoothie with a bit of tofu. It just blends right up, and obviously fruit and maybe other favorite things. Looking at eggs.
Chickpeas?
Yeah.
I
like
made a chocolate hummus the other day, Brooke. Let me tell you.
I'm going to plug my friends at Three Farmers. Oh, yeah. That sounds great. Yeah, you can get pretty creative with like black bean brownies, so those pulses and legumes. But the Three Farmers, my little one really likes their dill pickle fava beans, and they're rich in protein. Yeah. And, what's really interesting is dietitians can get pretty creative when you're working one-on-one. And it can feel like my kid eats 12 items. We are very good at creating balance within pretty limited palettes. And I've got some amazing dietitians who work with me who do work with neurodivergent related feeding differences.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Robbie, thanks for emailing. I really appreciate that. You can email to bluesky@cbc.ca, or you can call us at 1-800-716-2221. We were teasing folks about Fibermaxxing at the very start of the show. Let's talk about Fibermaxxing. This seems to have come on the heels of all the protein craze. Now we're needing fiber. What is Fibermaxxing?
Oh man, I love it. Protein has been the sexy nutrient for a long time. Move over. They're now sharing the spotlight with fiber, and as a GI dietitian, I love this. Fiber is one of the most underrated, nutrients, and it's interesting because it's a food component that we actually don't digest at all. We don't absorb it, but it plays such an important role. So, and this was part of with again, back to the inverted pyramid from the United States with all that meat at the top. And then they have this tiny little thing at the at the very, very bottom for carbohydrates. But carbohydrates, yes, including fruit and vegetables, but this is where we get the bulk of our fiber. So even if people are eating a host of fruit and vegetables and mostly animal proteins, but very little carbohydrates, it's really tough for them to meet their fiber needs. So fiber, our generally speaking, we want most adults to reach 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day. So I would say the average Canadian, most of my clients come in consuming roughly 15 grams. So we have some work to do for sure. But again, adding those pieces like oatmeal, high fiber cereals, like there's nothing wrong with a quarter cup of bran buds adding to some things. That will go a long way. It depends on how a person's gut functions too. Some of those foods aren't going to be well tolerated.
Right. What about Metamucil?
Oh, man. I'm laughing because I feel
don't know what to read into your reaction there, Brooke.
I know. I'm laughing because it's like one of the things I am like such a huge proponent of. Now, it doesn't have to be Metamucil. That is a brand. But psyllium fiber in the Metamucil or in a lot of different brands is excellent for our guts. It helps to fuel the bacteria, the health-promoting bacteria in our gut. And so when these health-promoting bacteria get that fuel from certain types of fiber, like Metamucil, but also certain nuts and seeds and fruit and vegetables, garlic, onions, bananas, things like that. They produce byproducts called short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids have been shown to reduce inflammation, improve our immune system, lower the risk of heart disease. Fiber helps to bind cholesterol. So when our cholesterol goes up, sometimes it's because the liver produces too much cholesterol. Sometimes it's from a high saturated fat diet or alcohol or high refined carbohydrate intake. But it'll bind the fiber can bind the cholesterol and excrete it from the body.
Right.
So fiber is also really great at helping to try to manage blood sugars, blood pressure.
But would you recommend someone take Metamucil? I know that's a brand, but Salim has every day, like
sometimes, yes. And I feel like, again, when we're talking about our capacity, we can't eat perfectly all the time. And in fact, there is no such thing as perfect eating. And this idea of, clean eating, I know people use that as a term just for lack of a better word, but there's really no such thing as like clean and dirty. So we try our best every day, including me. And when I notice like, oh, I must not be getting enough fiber, you bet. My backup is Metamucil. Some people need it every day. So, for example, if they have certain symptoms alongside irritable bowel syndrome, for example, but it can be an excellent add-on, especially if you feel like I work with a lot of veterinarians, teachers, people in the dental industry, people who don't have time sometimes to get those snacks in the day or sit down to have a lunch. And sometimes at the end of the day, it's like, how did I do? I'm going to take this supplement to help top me up. And that's where the individualization would come in.
Is there any way to overdo it? Like, I always worry when there is a new term and when, wellness folks on Instagram are telling me I need to Fibermaxx. Like, is there any way to overdo it or anything we need to be cautious of?
Yes, you can overdo fiber. So I would say if you're new to it, it wouldn't be for some people, now the disclaimer is if there is a history of disordered eating or if numbers are triggering, like I would never suggest or recommend people have to track. Mm-hmm. But even if it's tracked a little bit on paper, just to get an idea of what your fiber intake is at and how to reach it, I would say most people are not going to be Fibermaxxing. But yeah, you can create a lot of GI upset, and for sure, too much fiber can start to bind other nutrients like iron. Now, iron absorption is complex. So, there's all kinds of myths and misinformation about certain nutrients that like anti-nutrients that bind, other nutrients and prevent their absorption. But, that would be kind of the biggest thing. But I think most people are going to run into bloating and discomfort, maybe constipation or even looser stools before they really start to max out on fiber and run into issues. So I don't think there's a huge public health concern there.
Yeah, okay. We just got another email from Ted who writes, can you suggest a site that has credible evidence to help follow a low oxalate diet? I think that's related to kidney stones.
So there are oxalates in a lot of foods, spinach, fiber foods, and oxalates can bind certain nutrients. I think there's some misinformation around oxalates too. There is this assumption that you shouldn't eat, certain plants, and you shouldn't eat carbohydrates because they contain oxalates and prevent the absorption of important nutrients, for example, iron. But a lot of this is a little bit misinformed, and ultimately the bottom line is that because we eat such a variety of foods, most people don't need to be worried about that. Now, if this does relate to kidney stones, I'm just going to say this is not my area of focus, and it's not within my
like maybe talk to a doctor or something, or
or a dietitian, who understands.
Right.
I just don't do a lot with like kidney health right now, so
fair.
I'm not going to answer that.
Okay, that's totally fair. We don't have a ton of time left, and I've got like a list of questions like, what do I pick? Do you want to talk about snacks? Should we just talk about snacks as a way to end, like some healthy snack ideas? And otherwise, we're going to get into bigger topics like intermittent fasting and inflammation. So do you want to just talk about snacks and how to, fuel ourselves during the day?
Yeah. I think one of the things I remind folks is listen to your body, and some days you're going to need those between meal snacks, and some days you might not. If you're a 3-meal-a-day person, that's great. If you're someone who can't get to a sit-down lunch in their workday, what I'll suggest is let's pack 2 simple snacks, like grab-and-go items. I love snacks that include the path of least resistance. So, I feel like I'm that parent who's always like, oh, we're heading out the door, but like, dang, I'm getting hungry and I'm not going to be eating for a few hours. I'm always grabbing food and heading out the door. So I usually, again, rule of thumb, can there be a carbohydrate and a protein? So if it's a banana or an apple and a Baby Bell, or I'll be like grabbing a yogurt drink and a granola bar, or a meat stick, and, it's usually a piece of fruit. But yeah, it might be grab the bag of flavored pistachios and a granola bar, sit in your, car seat. I know kids are not supposed to eat in the car seats, but my kiddo's, he's almost 8.
It happens.
But it happens.
It has to happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
So disclaimer,
All the
I am
time.
not recommending your 2-year-old eat nuts we know that's a choking hazard, but my kid's almost 8. So it's like, yeah. So grab a couple of items, but carbohydrate plus the protein, that's going to help satisfy you. There's probably a source of fiber in there somewhere, especially, and I really think people don't grab fruit enough to snack on. Fruit and a protein source, like go for it. And most people I meet have under 1 fruit a day. So if we can aim for like 2 pieces of fruit a day, and if it's not fruit, then just if you like veggies better, that's fine. But yeah, I know. I know.
In a nutshell, I'm wondering if you can share a dietitian's take on alcohol, because tomorrow, and this is like a much bigger topic than I'm giving you like 45 seconds, but tomorrow we're checking in with craft brewers across the province, and there has been a shift in how a lot of people view alcohol and what the recommendations are. Just before we let you go, what would, if a client came to you and said, like, what do I do about drinking? Like, what's your take on it?
Canada came out with some new alcohol drinking guidelines, very unique from the rest of the world. And I highly recommend people look it up, new alcohol drinking guidelines in Canada. More than 3 per week has been shown to increase the risk of heart disease and cancer. So, yeah, something to think about.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
Brooke, it's always lovely to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being with us today.
I love it. Thanks for having me.
That is Brooke Bullock. She is a registered dietitian in Saskatoon, CEO of Food to Fit Nutrition.